Welcome to the webinar. This webinar is on the topic of remembering more of what you read with certain types of techniques. And I want to get right into the information here. As we know, when we're talking about speed reading, it's not just about speed, it's also about what you remember. Because I would argue that, if you're going fast and you can't remember anything later on, then that's not very useful. So let's talk about some techniques. And I think you're going to find these techniques to be very, very helpful. So let's get right into it. I want to start off by talking about the short-term memory. We all know that we're kind of limited in our short-term memory. What I mean by that is, you may already be familiar with this, the magic number 7. And in 1956 there was a paper, the exact name of the paper was the magic number 7 plus or minus 2. It was by this psychologist George Miller. And he basically was showing that the average capacity of short-term memory is about 7. Now, what does he mean by that? Well, think about when you're making a grocery list. How many items does it take before you actually have to start writing a list down? For example, if you were just getting bread and milk, you probably wouldn't make a list at all. But if you had to get, bread, milk, tomatoes, and maybe 10 other things, then obviously you're probably going to make a list because it's harder to remember, 9, 10, 11 or more things, and it's easier to remember a smaller amount of things. So basically George Miller's paper was talking about the magic number 7 and how most people, their memory is limited to about 7 individual pieces of data. Now the plus or minus 2 just accounts for just variations among people. Now, let's talk about how we can expand our short-term memory, because we don't want to be limited to just 7 things. And when you're reading, usually you have much more than 7 things that you have to remember. So we need some techniques, and one technique you can see on the screen here is called the chunking memory technique. The chunking technique can help you expand your short-term memory. So I want to talk about how the chunking technique works. So I want you to try, in this exercise, to memorize this 10-digit number. So look at the screen. Look at this number. Do not write it down. I just want you to look at it and try to memorize it. It's a really big number. It's 3,129,823,812. Now, how would you memorize that? You might repeat it to yourself a few times. Now, some people might write it down a few times to help them remember. I'm asking you, don't write it down. I just want you to try to look at this and try to memorize it. Now, let me ask you to memorize another 10-digit number now. And this is a 10-digit number, but it's in the format of a phone number. And I think we would all agree, which one of these is easier to memorize? Is it 3,129,823,812? Or 312,982,3812? I think all of us would agree that the bottom one, the one that's formatted like a phone number, is easier to memorize. And as you probably have already noticed, these two numbers are exactly the same numbers. It's just one has commas and the other has, hyphens in the form of a format. And I want you to think about, why is that second one easier for you to remember? It's because of the chunking technique. And I say chunking technique. We're going to talk about how to use the chunking technique, but the reason it's easier to remember is because it's chunking the information for you. Remember how we said the magic number 7 is kind of like our limit for short-term memory. But if you can chunk the information into pieces, like this phone number, which is, this number is 10 digits long. But if you chunk it into a phone number, now it's just 3 pieces of information, right? 312-982-3812. Actually, if you look at this and you already recognize the area code, you would know that 312 is a Chicago area code, and this number over here, you can just memorize these 2 chunks. Now, by the way, I've typed this number out at random. Please don't try calling this person. I don't even know whose number this is, so I just made it up. So 312-982-3812 is easier to memorize because our brain is chunking the information. Now, if you've memorized the number, you've automatically boosted your short-term memory to 10 digits. Okay, that's useful. But let's take it a step further. Let's apply the chunking technique to some letters. Now, earlier we had, this was a 10-digit number. This is now 14 letters. Okay. how would you use the chunking technique on these 14 letters? Now, a lot of people would look at this, and if I asked you, let's say I took it away right now and said, okay, do you remember them? It might be a little hard to remember those letters. Now, if you look at it and you might, how can you apply the chunking technique? You can chunk this too. And actually, you might chunk it into these parts. So look what I'm doing here. We're taking this string of letters and we're turning it into these chunks. So I just put dashes where the chunks should be. So you can see IBM, SAT, PhD, MTV, and then X's on the ends. This is the same series of letters as what we have up here. But when it's chunked, it becomes easier to memorize. Now I'm showing these as an example because I want you to start learning how your memory works, what it likes, what it doesn't like. Your memory likes things that are chunked. Your memory actually works in a way where we don't remember things bit by bit or piece of information by piece of information. We actually remember things in clusters. So when I say remembering things in clusters, I mean you remember one thing and that reminds you of another thing and so on and so forth. So for example, if I say the word Katrina, what do you associate the word Katrina to? Well, some people might associate the word Katrina to hurricane, and that reminds them of New Orleans. And New Orleans reminds them of Mardi Gras. And it might also remind them of like really, really great seafood. All of these things come to mind as a result of remembering the word Katrina. Now, if you know people that are named Katrina, maybe you've got a girlfriend or your wife is named Katrina, well, then you're going to remember something like that. You'll associate. So that's what I'm trying to get across. So we remember things in clusters or in chunks. And you can chunk information to remember it better. Now, if you're going to try and apply this technique and memorize this, notice what we did here with these letters. We took a group of 14 letters and we chunked it into, I would say, 4 parts. Here's one part, another part, another part, and another. And these X's on the ends, I would just assume those are like bookends. So I'd remember 2 X's on the sides, and then I would try to go about memorizing IBM, SAT, PhD, MTV. And it becomes easier than trying to memorize all this, even though it's exactly the same series of letters. So you see how chunking can help you. Now, if you were able to memorize this, if you're able to memorize this, now you've boosted your short-term memory capacity to 14 letters. Now remember what it was before. Our short-term memory capacity is typically 7. But if we want to expand our short-term memory capacity to something like 14 letters, we need to employ the chunking memory technique. Now, how do we use chunking to remember what we read? A mind map is actually a form of chunking. When you create a mind map to take notes, you are actually chunking the information that you read and you're putting it into groups. So notice how each one of these groups, so this is just a sample mind map here on time management. And notice how all of these areas have pretty much less than 7 things under them. Why? Because it's hard to remember more than 7 things. So you have a topic and then you've got a few things under. Clarity. And you have some things under here. You've got effectiveness over here. You've got a few under there. And so on and so forth. So mind mapping is actually a very effective way, and we talk about this all the time in our speed reading courses. Using mind maps can actually help you remember what you read because it employs the chunking technique. And we know that we remember things in chunks or clusters. So if you create a mind map to take notes, I want you to also know that taking notes, just the act of taking notes, whether you use a mind map or you use any other form of note-taking, the action of taking notes actually helps you remember more of what you read. And it's because this action of taking notes is actually a form of repetition. And repetition helps you remember things. So keep that in mind. I'll even repeat it. Repetition helps you remember things. So it's really important for you to know this. We had a little comment from Felix here. He says he's taking notes right now. So if you're taking notes during this webinar, even better. That actually is, that's a good point. When you're taking notes, that helps you re-emphasize. You learn something by hearing it. You're listening to my voice, but you're also seeing it on the screen. And if you're also writing it down, you've got these 3 different forms of repetition that are helping you to remember something. So that's very important. Let's go on to the next slide. So let's talk about another technique here. This is called the PEG system. This is going to help you remember things visually. Now, this is the reason why I'm bringing this up. This is one of the easiest memory systems you can learn. And I'm going to show you how to do it in this webinar. And it actually can be applied to a list of anything, and it helps you remember things in their exact order as well. And this can help you remember a list of 10 items, or it could help you, this PEG system can actually be extended to help you remember 20 things, or 30 things, or 40 things. And I want to talk to you about how you use this. So try to bear with me here. First, this is going to take maybe 15 minutes to show you how to learn this, and I'm actually going to teach you how to memorize a list right now, and then I'm going to talk to you about how do you apply this to remembering what you read. So let's start. We need to deeply encode a memory, and we need to do it using a PEG system. So let's assume that we have to remember a 10-item list. So I'm going to teach you how to use the PEG system first by showing you how to remember a 10-item grocery list. And this is a grocery list that we have on the screen. I want you to memorize this. Now, do not write it down. I just want you to look at it and try to memorize it. But I'm going to teach you how to memorize this because the PEG system can help you memorize this list in order. Let me show you how. You see number one? Number one is going to be our pencil. So here's what I mean by that. Before we start remembering bread, milk, tomatoes, soda, and so on and so forth, we need to first create a visual for each one of these numbers. So the number one, I always say the number one looks like a pencil to me. I don't know about you, but it's pretty obvious that a one is in a very similar shape to a pencil. Okay? So let's picture the number one. This is what I need you to actually memorize right now. I'm going to need you to memorize a visual for each one of these numbers. So number one is going to be our pencil. Now, I need you to memorize number two. Two looks like a swan. Okay? If it doesn't look like a swan to you, try to picture it like a swan. So if you look at the number two, there's the head, there's the neck, and it curves around, and there's the body. Picture your number two as a swan. Now we need to remember number three. Let's picture number three as McDonald's, but sideways. Okay, so the number three is going to remind us of McDonald's. Now, this might seem a little odd. For example, you might be asking yourself, why are we doing this? We'll get to that in a moment. But for right now, I need you to focus on memorizing visuals for each one of the numbers, from numbers 1 through 10. So again, 1 is a pencil, 2 is a swan, 3 is McDonald's. Let's move on to number 4. 4 is a chair. Okay? So number 4 is going to be our chair. And Felix brought up a good point. The more absurd that the visual is, the better. So that's why I like to have like a pencil with some glasses, and this swan isn't really absurd, but McDonald's. 4 is going to be our chair, so an upside down chair. Number 5 is going to be a hook. Now, number 5 is sometimes tricky, but I want you to picture the number 5 as like an upside down hook. So picture, here's the curvy part of the 5 right here. And picture this as our number 5. You really need to memorize these numbers and these visuals in order for the PEG system to work. So again, just a quick review. 1 is our pencil, 2 is a swan, 3 is McDonald's, 4 is a chair, and 5 is a hook. Let's try number 6. 6 is going to be a cherry. I want you to memorize that the number 6 looks like a cherry visually. Let's go on to 7. 7 is going to be a lightning bolt. So how is that possible? Well, picture, this is the top of the 7 right here, and this is the curvy part, well, the diagonal part of the 7. So imagine the 7 as a lightning bolt. Imagine the number 8 as a racetrack. Okay? And imagine the number 9 as a balloon. Lastly, number 10 is going to be a plate with some silverware. Maybe a fork on the side or a knife on the side. So picture number 10 as a plate with silverware. So real quickly, I want to recap these because I want to make sure that you've memorized these in your head. The PEG system will not work unless you associate every one of the numbers to some kind of a visual. So again, real quickly, number 1 is a pencil. Number 2 is a swan. Number 3 is McDonald's. Number 4 is a chair. Number 5 looks like a hook. Number 6 looks like a cherry. Number 7 looks like lightning. Number 8 looks like a racetrack. And number 9 looks like a balloon. And lastly, number 10 is going to look like a plate with silverware. Now, let's move on to step number 2. Now that we've kind of memorized these visuals, we now need to kind of remember, okay, how are we going to associate these visuals to our actual list? We need to memorize this list of actual grocery items. So watch what we're going to do now. We need to associate number one. What was number one again? You probably remember number one is a pencil. So we need to associate the pencil to bread. Now, this is an actual, believe it or not, a number of weeks ago, this is an actual grocery list that I had. And I was trying to memorize this list, and it didn't take me very long. It probably took me less than 3 minutes, but I had to create the visualizations quickly for that to happen. So here's how, I usually remember, I try to think of the first weird thing that pops into my head. I know that can be strange sometimes, but whatever it is, I go with. So number one, I pictured a pencil, and I pictured a piece of bread, a big piece of bread on top, on top of a pencil. Kind of like cotton candy, you know how there's like, but picture a big piece of loaf of bread on top of a pencil. That's what I really need you guys to visualize this right now. Now, I know this might sound a little odd, but I want you to try to visualize it, and that way it'll kind of help you out. So, bread and pencil. Now, visualize the number 2. We know that the number 2 was a swan, and I want you to visualize that with milk. What I pictured in my head was a swan swimming around in a lake of milk. Okay? So really try to picture this. Let's do number 3. 3 was McDonald's. And I had to associate a visual image of McDonald's with a visual image of tomatoes. So here's how I did that in my head. And I want you to copy this visual imagery to your head. I was thinking that I just walked into McDonald's and I ordered myself a Big Mac meal. And I do like myself a Big Mac every so often, even though it's not the healthiest thing out there. And I order this Big Mac, and instead, when I open it up, instead of finding beef, I find really thick slices of tomatoes. So essentially, they gave me like a veggie burger Big Mac instead of a regular Big Mac. So I'm outraged, and I want a real Big Mac. So imagine that for a moment, that you go to McDonald's and you get a Big Mac with big slices of tomatoes instead of beef. Now, that's our number 3. Number 4. 4 we know looks like a chair, and we need to picture a chair and soda. So I want you to picture a chair with legs made out of 2-liter bottles of soda. So it's a chair, but instead of regular legs, it has bottles of soda holding up the chair. So picture that for a moment. Now, number 5, here's what I pictured for number 5, and again, I want you to visualize this too. Number 5 is a hook. We need to picture that with a turkey. I pictured Thanksgiving dinner, and we had an uncle that came over that happened to have a hook for a hand, and he was carving the turkey with his hook. Okay? Very unsanitary stuff here. So he's carving up the turkey with his hook. It's Thanksgiving dinner. That's what I'm picturing in my head. Now, I do not have an uncle that's a pirate or anything like that, but I'm picturing this as just a strange, absurd, exaggerated image. Okay? So hook carving up the turkey on Thanksgiving. Number 6. Here's what I pictured for number 6. We know that 6 is a cherry. I pictured that, and I got to associate that with chips. So I pictured cherry-flavored chips. So I open up a bag of chips, and I'm expecting, let's say, maybe some salty chips, and instead of salty taste, I taste like the taste of cherries, which kind of confuses me. Why are there cherry-flavored chips? But I want you to think about how that would taste. Obviously, it would taste probably a little sweet instead of, salty. But if you can imagine this in your head, it's going to help you remember the imagery better. So we picture cherry-flavored chips. So 6, we remember cherries, and that reminds us of, oh yeah, cherry-flavored chips. Let's move on to number 7. 7 was our lightning bolt. We got to associate that with strawberries. The first image that popped into my head was this giant strawberry right by an open window. And it happens to be a thunderstorm outside, and some lightning strikes this strawberry, which is right by the window, and it's a big strawberry, by the way. And when it hits the strawberry, this strawberry explodes, and now there is red goo from the strawberry all over the walls. And I want you to think about what that would look like, what that would smell like if a strawberry was, an explosion of a strawberry from a lightning bolt striking it. This is, I know, it's kind of an elaborate image, but believe it or not, this is going to help me remember strawberries. So a lightning bolt is striking a big strawberry. Number 8. We know that number 8 is a racetrack, right? And we know that we have to remember deodorant. So if we picture the racetrack, remember this was our picture for the racetrack. If these roads were actually crossing, the race car drivers would get a little bit nervous because every time they go over this way, they have the chance of crashing. So when you get nervous, you get very, I don't know, you kind of sweat. But these guys are sweating a lot. So every time they get to the middle, they sweat even more. And when you sweat, you start to smell. And these race car drivers, I am picturing them as sweaty, stinky race car drivers that desperately need some deodorant. That's how it's going to help me remember. Racetrack, stinky race car drivers equals deodorant. Number 9. We said number 9 was a balloon. Now, I don't want you to picture a balloon like this. I want you to picture a massive balloon, a blimp, instead of just a little balloon. And instead of a blimp, like, you know, the Goodyear blimp, I want you to picture instead a blimp that is a giant cucumber floating across the sky. Now, number 10 is going to be cereal. And we're going to picture a bowl instead of a plate with silverware. We're going to picture a giant bowl. And inside of this giant bowl, someone is pouring, you know, giant pieces of cereal are falling from the sky into this bowl, okay? So a giant cereal bowl, almost like you want to exaggerate this stuff in a way like a, you know, Alice in Wonderland style exaggeration. It's gigantic, okay? So let's go over it really quickly. 1 was bread, so pencil with bread. So I'm holding a pencil, and on top of it is this big loaf of bread. Number 2 was a swan, and the swan is swimming around in this pure lake of milk. Very easy to picture that. Number 3 was McDonald's. Ah, I know what McDonald's is. I walk into McDonald's, and I ordered my Big Mac, and instead of, you know, beef, I have these big, thick slices of tomatoes. Number 4 was a chair. So 4, picture the chair, and what are the legs made out of? Oh yeah, they're made out of soda bottles. Okay. Number 5 was a hook. We picture a hook, and that reminds me of Thanksgiving dinner because I've got an uncle that shows up at Thanksgiving dinner whom I've never met, and he's carving up the turkey with his hook of a hand. Number 6 was a cherry. So all I got to remember is, okay, cherry. Oh yeah, there were cherry-flavored chips. What would that taste like? Oh yeah, I remember that. Okay, 7 is our lightning bolt. And I'm picturing a lightning bolt. What is it striking? It's striking a giant strawberry, and the strawberry explodes all over the room, all over the walls. Number 8 was a racetrack, and I'm picturing some stinky, sweaty race car drivers driving around that need deodorant. Number 9 is a blimp. Number 9 is actually a balloon, but a really big balloon. In other words, a blimp, but it's not your Goodyear blimp, it's a cucumber blimp. It's a giant cucumber floating across the sky. And number 10 was cereal. Big bowl, because we remember plate and silverware, I'll remember that as actually a bowl, and giant pieces of cereal falling from the sky and being poured into this big bowl. Now, we already did all these images. Can we remember the list? So I want to test you guys out really quickly. And let's see if we got it memorized. Okay, so let's do a test here, and anybody that wants to, feel free to submit something on the chat. What is number 1? Type it into the chat. So the way that you remember is, 1 is the pencil, and we remember, obviously, bread. Okay, what's number 2? Milk. What's number 3? Think about that. Type it in the chat box if you want. 3 was McDonald's. All right, very good. What is number 4? Write it in the chat. All right, very good. I'm getting a number of people replying. Very good. What's number 5? Very good. What's number 6? It looks like a cherry, and that reminds us of... Very good. What's number 7? 7 is our lightning bolt, and that reminds us of... Very good. What's number 8? 8 was a racetrack, right? That reminds us of those sweaty, stinky race car drivers. Very good. I'm glad you guys are participating in the chat. I do appreciate that. That actually makes this kind of fun. What's number 9? Awesome. Number 10. And look at that. We got them all. Now, without looking at your list, I'll bet you've got this pretty well memorized. So I don't even have to ask you in order. I could just ask you number 5. And you probably know that number 5 is, go ahead and put it in the chat, turkey. Very good. And you know what number 3 is, don't you? You know what number 2 is. You know, all of these things come easily because you've memorized that, okay, number 2 is associated with a swan, and now I remember milk. So this is how the PEG system works. That's why I was kind of going over these images for so long. Now, we actually spent a good 5 minutes working on, you know, trying to memorize 1 through 10, basically. Once you've memorized 1 through 10, if those images work for you, like, you know, if number 1 looks like a pencil to you, then you keep that. That's always going to be your number 1. Number 1 is always going to be associated with the visual imagery of a pencil. 2 is always going to be a swan. Now, some people, they look at the number 4, and let me go back real quick to see what the 4 looks like. Now, I think I always write my 4s like this, but some people, they write their 4s like this 4 up here. Now, this 4 up here could also look like a flag to some people, or some people say that looks like a sailboat. Whatever it looks like to you is basically what you use. But you can extend this, because we just did this with 10 images. Well, what if we wanted to do 10 more items? How would we do that? Well, to do 10 more items, it's actually interesting, because what you need to do, if you had to remember 11 through 20, let's say you had a 20 item list, you could still use the PEG system. And I'll show you how, and you can work on this on your own. You would basically do this. For me, 11, you find a theme for your 11 through 20. Now, you can use my theme if you want, or you can use another theme. But my theme is that everything is drenched in black oil. Okay? So, here's how I utilize this. Remember how earlier we said number 2 was milk, right? Because we remember that Swan was a number 2. And I remember the swan was swimming in a lake of milk. But what if milk was not item number 2? What if milk was number 12 on the list? Okay, watch how I do it now. I'm going to still picture, I take the number 12, and I know that I got to remember the 12th item on the list is milk, so I picture the number 2. I got to picture a swan plus black oil. So here's all I got to do is very simple. I could just say, all right, the swan, let's say the swan is drenched in black oil. Instead of a white swan, it's a black swan, and it's black because it's drenched in black oil, and it is still swimming around in a lake of milk. And as it's swimming around, it's kind of it's leaving a trail of black oil because it's dirty from this oil, and it's kind of you know, there's a pure lake of milk, and it's kind of making this lake dirty with this trail because it's drenched in black oil. So that's how I could, if the item number was 12, and 12 was equal to milk, that's all I do. I take the 2, and that's a swan. I have to add swan plus oil and milk. And if you can string these things together, that'll help out. By the way, if you're wondering, you can extend it. If you really wanted to practice this, you could continue extending this all the way up to 100. You could do 21 through 30. For me, 21 through 30 is ice cubes. So everything has to be associated with ice cubes. So if number 22 was milk, then I'm going to take the 2, which is a swan, and because it's in the 20s, I've basically got to do associate with ice cubes. Now let me back up, because Felix asked, can you show the list of 11 through 20 again? So 12, 13, 14, try taking, basically you would take a pencil and you would try to work that with oil. Pencil plus oil plus detergent, okay? So you might picture yourself washing a white t-shirt that is stained with this big black oil stain or something. And because it's stained, you need detergent, right? So same thing with like number 12. You would associate, okay, a swan and toilet paper, huh? Now, I'm sure there's all sorts of crazy ways we could associate a swan plus oil plus toilet paper. So the more creative that you do this, yeah, that's absolutely right, Felix. You had the question about swan plus oil. Yes, you're basically taking the first number you see here, like the 3, and we would say, okay, McDonald's. 3 is McDonald's, but I'm on 13, so that means I got to take my theme for numbers 11 through 20. I know my theme for 11 through 20 is oil, so I got to add McDonald's plus oil and associate that to yogurt. This one I got to associate a chair plus oil to flowers. So glad that makes sense. I wanted to make sure that was nice and clear. Now, basically, when we go over a PEG system, a lot of people are like, okay, so what? I just memorized a 10-item list. Now, I wouldn't say so what. I would say, hey, that's pretty impressive because you know what? You guys can probably still remember this list from what we just did. And actually, try this out later on tomorrow. I want you guys to test yourselves and see if you could still remember my grocery list from a few weeks ago. And it's actually pretty amazing how easily this sticks with you. So let's talk about how we apply this to reading. What you would do is you would take a section of a chapter. Let's say your chapter has 10 sections, or maybe it only has 5 sections, and you needed to remember all the sections in that chapter. You would associate. I usually do this during the final review of the multiple reading process. What I do is I put a number 1 next to the first section that I need to remember. And I put a number 2 next to section 2. And what I do is after I'm done reading the whole chapter, I go back, and during my final review, I say, okay, how am I going to associate a pencil to section 1 of this chapter? And then I go on to section 2, and I say, how am I going to associate a swan in some kind of ridiculous way to section number 2? And the more visual you can make this, the better. The more crazy that you can make this, the better. So I'll give you a good example. I was doing this kind of a system with a student in law school. And what she was studying was, this was actually a chapter on the Constitution. And section number 1 of the chapter was talking about the founding fathers of, Thomas Jefferson and, the people that were writing the Constitution and all that. And when she was done reading this chapter, it was like a 30-page chapter, and I think it had like 6 or 7 sections in it. We were using the PEG system to remember the chapter and to remember it also in order. So what we did for the first section, we took basically we had to associate pencil, and the first section was talking about the founding fathers. So we pictured Thomas Jefferson holding and writing the Constitution with this ginormous pencil. So imagine, you've probably seen one of these novelty, crazy big pencils. So we were picturing Thomas Jefferson with one of those writing the Constitution. Who would have known that the Constitution was written with such a giant pencil? Okay, now section number 2 was, we know that 2 is a swan. Section number 2 in this person's chapter, and again, she was a law student, section number 2 was about the court system in the U.S., and how you have a federal court system, the state court system, and then the local court system. So what we did was we pictured 3 different swans. A big swan to represent the federal court system, a medium-sized swan to represent the state court system, and a really small swan to represent the local court system. You can almost think of it if you've ever seen like ducks crossing the road, or maybe you've seen it on a cartoon where there's like the mom and dad duck and then all the little kids following them. So we pictured big swan, medium swan, small swan, and that helped us remember, oh yeah, this was the part of the chapter where they were talking about the 3 different court systems, federal, state, and local. And we did this with every section in the chapter. So it's a very useful way to go about getting an idea and remembering what you what you're trying to go through. And this is how you can apply the PEG system to reading. Now, Edward brings up a really good question that I want to mention here. He mentioned, I'll read this question out loud. I know how to memorize a grocery list now. Well, how do I learn my next list without confusing it with last week's? That's a very good question. Now, initially, I had the same question when I was learning the PEG system. I was trying to figure out, well, what if I confuse like lists from like last week and things like that? What you can do actually, this system is actually more flexible than you think. It's almost, I like to think of it like a dry erase board. Once I start associating new items with new things, I basically end up like kicking out the last items, and it's amazing how this works because actually I'm telling you right now about the grocery list I had from a few weeks ago, and I can remember 1 through 10, but I also applied this technique a number of weeks ago also with a law student, and I was using 1 through 10, and I was remembering chapters within sections of a chapter. Now you can replace this system week to week, so I do understand that it could get a little tricky. But try it out and you'll notice that it tends to work more or less like a whiteboard, where once you make some new visualizations, you need to make sure those visualizations are nice and strong. Otherwise, it's going to be really hard to kick out those. If you had stronger, visualizations last time and you come up with some weak visualizations this time, then you'll probably remember the visualizations from before better. So keep in mind that your visualizations always need to be very vivid. And another tip that I have for you, if you're creating these visualizations, try to include other senses. By that I mean we have our 5 senses, right? We see things, we hear things, we touch things, we taste. All the different 5 senses, you can employ them while you're creating these images. For example, remember earlier I said, the strawberry gets struck by lightning. What would that smell like? Right? I said about the cherry flavored chips. What would that taste like? And when you think about how that would taste, that actually helps you remember something even more. So the more senses that you can include in your visualization, when you're thinking about how does that smell? How does that taste? When I was remembering the bread on top of the pencil, I was picturing myself and visualizing and thinking about what would it taste like for me to be eating this nice, warm loaf of bread. Maybe it's straight out of the oven. So this is how you can kind of remember things a little better. So try to utilize these things. That's the only way you're going to get better at anything is if you practice and implement. So I always mention at the end of every webinar here, my contact information. If you do want to get in touch at some point in the near future or later, feel free to shoot me an email. I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. If you have a question or any kind of comments, Iris also does these workshops at different companies and schools throughout the U.S. We've done this for employees of Google. We've done this for for Groupon's executive team. We even did this actually for employees of NASA. And I always tell people that attend these webinars, if you like this workshop, you like this program, tell your friends about it, and if you do not like it, tell your enemies about it, because that will really show them, right? So thank you all for attending, and enjoy the rest of your day.